I think that 15-year-olds could have had enough
The awareness.
to know to try to avoid cameras. He bought a bottle a month before and played with it until they got it right. Sounds to me like somebody did a premix.
That would be my assumption.
Open the bottle, toss it in, and walk to the next shelf. Out to the next store or whatever.
Once again, it's Murder and Mayhem Monday. Welcome back. My name is Franklin James, the serial author, and I hope you all have a mayhem-less week. Now, today I'll be taking you back to a crisp September morning in 1982. Chicago was waking up to an ordinary day, but within hours, an invisible killer would claim 7 lives. And this killer didn't use a knife or a gun. This killer used something millions of people trusted and took whenever needed. The killer's weapon of choice was Tylenol. Now, this is the case of the Chicago Tylenol murders, a case that sparked fear across the nation, changed how we buy medicine, and remains unsolved over 4 decades later. Was it an inside job or someone simply looking for a thrill? Let's examine what happened back in 1982 and break down the possible motive behind these murders. All right, it all started on September 29th, 1982, and Mary Kellerman, the first victim, was 12 years old. She woke up that morning with a sore throat and runny nose. Her parents gave her 1 extra-strength Tylenol capsule, and minutes later, she collapsed. She was dead by 7 a.m. Now, that same day, Adam Janis, a 27-year-old postal worker, died suddenly after taking Tylenol. In fact, while his brother and sister-in-law were grieving at his home, they both needed Tylenol, and they took it from the same bottle. Soon they both collapsed and died. 7 people in the Chicago area, seemingly healthy, suddenly died. And the only connection between them? Tylenol. Now, the police moved quickly and determined this wasn't a bad batch. It was intentional. It was sabotage. And after testing the Tylenol, they discovered something horrifying. The capsules had been laced with potassium cyanide, a deadly poison that works within minutes. The police also determined that the capsules weren't tampered with during the manufacturing process. But would the manufacturer really reveal if they were? I mean, I doubt it. It's bad for business. Yet nonetheless, investigators believe that someone had purchased the bottles, inserted the poison, and then returned them to store shelves. This wasn't just a local incident. It was considered domestic terrorism. And as a result, Tylenol was pulled from shelves across the country. Johnson & Johnson, the parent company, issued a nationwide recall. They recalled 31 million bottles. It cost them over $100 million. But remarkably, Johnson & Johnson's transparency and swift action became a case study in corporate crisis management. They were the ones to introduce the tamper-evident packaging, which eventually became standard across the pharmaceutical industry. But as fear spread, people threw out painkillers, and Tylenol sales plummeted. In fact, hospitals were flooded with people who were afraid they had been poisoned. Trick-or-treating was canceled on Halloween in certain parts of Illinois, and supermarkets and grocery stores installed security cameras. This tragedy reshaped public trust, because something as routine as taking medicine came with a side of anxiety. Yet, despite a massive FBI investigation, no one was ever charged with the murders. However, in 1982, a man named James William Lewis sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson claiming to be responsible. He demanded $1 million to stop the killings, and eventually, he was caught and imprisoned, but only for extortion. There was no physical evidence linking him to the actual poisonings. And unfortunately, to this day, no one has officially been named the Tylenol killer. Now, in 2009, the case was reopened, and FBI agents raided the home of James Lewis again. But still, there were no charges. But throughout it all, the Tylenol murders changed everything. It led to federal anti tampering laws, and product safety was never treated casually again. But here's the haunting truth: this killer could still be alive, out there watching and waiting, searching for the right moment to strike. I mean, it's eerie to think about, right? An invisible killer. But as for the families of Mary Kellerman, Adam Janis, and others, I'm afraid they may never get the justice they truly deserve. But let's tackle this difficult question: what kind of person poisons random strangers? Well, let's explore the answer from a psychological point of view. The tampering aspect of this case was methodical, suggesting high cognitive functioning and planning ability. The suspects likely understood chemistry to some degree or researched how to acquire and use cyanide. The selection of Tylenol, a trusted household product, reveals a desire to exploit public trust, maximizing fear and chaos. And the cold, detached nature of the crime, including the lack of personal connection to the victims, is indicative of psychopathy. This act reflects a need for control or power, possibly driven by a God complex or desire to show dominance over life and death. A majority of serial offenders feel neglected or abandoned during their childhood. So, for the Tylenol killer, this may have been the perfect opportunity to gain some notoriety. And it's likely that the killer was local, familiar with the Chicago area, because the spread of affected bottles was limited to that region. The killer may have even worked in logistics, supply chain, or pharmacy sectors. Or the killer posed as a customer, who knew how to reseal packaging to avoid suspicion. Either way, unlike typical serial killers, this offender didn't seem to derive personal gratification from physical proximity to the victims. Instead, the psychological high may have come from abstract control, watching media coverage, witnessing national panic, and knowing that ordinary people were dying due to a silent, invisible killer. The Tylenol killer didn't just steal lives. This monster rewrote the rules of fear. This silent killer left murder and mayhem in their wake, and those poor families are just looking for justice. But I do want to thank you all for tuning in. And I do ask that you stab that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the Tylenol murders. Share this video out there, hit that bell for notifications, and if possible, avoid mayhem.